Banana Island gleamed under the morning sun, casting long shadows over the mansion as I arrived for my second day. The night before had left me restless, haunted by that message on Funk's phone. I hadn't yet met the other two women in Funk's close-knit circle, Mrs. Adeabi and Mrs. Sod, but from what I'd heard in whispers and rumors, they were as untouchable as Funk, and maybe even more dangerous. Stepping into the kitchen, I found Mrs. Funk already seated at the breakfast table, a half-finished cup of coffee in her hand. She didn't look at me as I entered, and I took a quiet breath, relieved. Her usual mask of charm had slipped, replaced by something cold and calculating. Without lifting her gaze, she said, "Today, we're having company." I nodded, noting the tense undertone in her voice. "Yes, Ma." She didn't elaborate, but I knew who she meant. The schedule she had handed me the day before listed a lunch meeting with her two closest friends, Adeabi and Sod. Funk didn't need a personal aide for simple tasks, she needed someone who wouldn't speak, someone who could witness without seeing. I was prepared for the role, but something in my gut warned me to tread carefully. By noon, Mrs. Adeabi and Mrs. Sod arrived. Adeabi was a petite woman with a taste for extravagance. She wore a fitted emerald green dress, the kind that hugged her figure and sparkled with every move. Her face was set in a permanent expression of mild boredom, but her eyes were sharp. You could tell she wasn't the type to miss a thing. Sod, on the other hand, was quiet, almost withdrawn, with a soft smile that seemed a little too practiced. She was the one I'd heard about, the woman rumored to be involved in human trafficking, masking her dealings under the cover of charity work. The three women sat together in the parlor, their voices lowered as they sipped on wine and nibbled at small bites prepared by the chef. I stayed out of their sight, quietly arranging items on a side table. But their conversation carried through the room, and soon enough, I realized they weren't just friends, they were partners in something far darker. Adeabi leaned in, her voice a harsh whisper. "I don't think the ministry's auditors will be a problem, Funk. We've handled them before. They know which side their bread is buttered on." Funk nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Good. We don't need any unnecessary noise right now. Not with the elections coming up." My heart pounded as I pieced together fragments of their conversation. Adeabi's role at the ministry went beyond her public persona. She wasn't just a senator's wife but a woman with hands deep in government funds. I took a small step back, my fingers brushing against the cool wood of the table behind me. Soda's quiet voice cut through the murmur. "And the boys?" she asked, her tone casual but her words chilling. "The new shipment arriving on Tuesday. I've already taken care of the arrangements." Adeabi nodded approvingly, as if discussing nothing more than the weather. I clenched my jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. These weren't just wives of senators, they were something far more sinister, a group pulling strings from the shadows, their reach extending into lives they saw as expendable. But I had to stay focused. This was just the beginning, a crack in the facade that I needed to widen. I stayed silent, making my way back to the kitchen, my mind racing. These women were connected in ways I had barely begun to understand, but one thing was certain, Femi's disappearance was no accident. As the lunch continued, Funk called out, "Amina, bring us another bottle." "Yes, Ma." I returned with a chilled bottle of wine, pouring their drinks with a steady hand as they spoke freely, as if I were invisible. The ease with which they discussed matters left me chilled, as if lives were nothing more than disposable assets to them. Funk looked at me sharply as I filled her glass, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Amina, you're quite the silent one, aren't you?" she said, her tone edged with suspicion. "Yes, Ma," I replied calmly, keeping my head down. "I only speak when spoken to." She smirked, satisfied with my response. "Good. I like my staff discreet." But as I walked away, I felt her eyes linger on my back, as though she sensed something more. My heart beat faster, but I kept my face neutral. Whatever mask she wore, whatever games they played, I'd learn every one of their secrets. Later that day, as I prepared to leave, I noticed a figure waiting at the gate depot. He looked around cautiously before nodding to me, motioning subtly to follow. I hesitated, but curiosity won. I slipped past the guards and followed him to a secluded corner of the driveway. "You don't belong here," he said in a low voice, his gaze intense. "I don't know what you're after, but whatever it is, you should leave before it's too late." I stiffened, caught off guard by his warning. Depot's tone wasn't hostile, it was filled with concern. But I couldn't afford to trust him. Not yet. Not when he was one of them. "I'm just here for the job," I said evenly, my face giving nothing away. Depot sighed, running a hand through his hair, his expression filled with an unspoken regret. "People like you don't understand this world. You think you're prepared, but you have no idea how deep it goes." Before I could reply, he turned and walked back toward the house, leaving me standing in the shadows, the weight of his words settling heavily in my chest. As I watched Depot's retreating figure, I realized that in my search for Femi, I had stepped into something far darker than I had imagined. And leaving, as he suggested, might not be an option anymore.